You're listening to the New Frontier Network with Chris Iverson and Victor Vigiani.
Welcome to NFN, the New Frontier Network, where we explore the new frontiers of phenomenology, ufology, and exopolitics. Another episode is coming your way. We're pleased to have you all with us. And joining with us today, as always, our distinguished panel of international correspondents and panelists, starting with in Europe, we have Francisco Mirao Correa from Portugal. Representing the Southern Hemisphere is Giorgio Picenza, live from Peru. North of the border, we have Chrissy Newton, who has made her way back to Canada after spending a little time on the West Coast. And as always, my brilliant, educated, insightful, and also from Toronto, Victor Vigiani.
Yeah, thank
Victor,
you. I take exception with the word brilliant. Come on, Chris. Thank you.
I had it written down here, so I had to read it.
Okay,
so that's
gotcha.
They make me do these things.
All right.
How are you doing today? We have another exciting presentation here for you today, an interview that we hope will be insightful and give us an idea as to where we are going with our favorite topics here.
Yeah, no, it's great to be together again. The idea behind what the New Frontier Network is doing or attempting to do is look forward to where all of this information about UAP, extraterrestrials, however you want to categorize it, just where it's all going and what's over the horizon with respect to how the human family responds to what's going on. That's, I think, the key issue that's before us, and how we can anticipate and probably educate a segment of the population that watches the New Frontier Network about what this thing really means, what the implications are, and what the future holds from us or holds for us. And during the interviews that we've done with people like Ralph Blumenthal and Luis Elizondo, they've given us a really great perspective as to how things are going, where they're going, and why they're going in a certain direction. And today, I think our guest is probably another one in the litany of people that we can talk to provide us with a really great perspective on where things are going with respect to this UAP issue. So our guest today is Tim McMillan. So I'm just going to briefly share his bio with our listeners before we begin. Tim spent nearly 2 decades in law enforcement, serving as an investigator, behavioral analyst, criminal intelligence analyst, and instructor, and as a senior police executive. And after retiring from law enforcement in 2019, Tim employed his unique background and avid curiosity to begin a second career as an investigative writer, primarily focusing on the defense and intelligence communities. Chris has delivered unparalleled and groundbreaking features in articles and for popular outlets such as Vice News, The War Zone, and Popular Mechanics. In 2020, Tim co-founded the online media outlet, The Debrief, providing a public venue for credible reporting on science, technology, and defense news. And currently, Tim serves as the executive director of The Debrief Media and a senior investigative writer for The Debrief. Tim McMillan, welcome to the New Frontier Network.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Yeah.
It'll be fun.
I don't really like reading bios like that. They seem a little bit formal, but I think it's important that our audience understand who you are, what your background is. But tell us a little bit just about the Debrief before we get going, and what it's all about, and where you're headed, and what your main goals are.
Sure. Yeah. No, the Debrief, like you mentioned, we launched it in November of last year. Myself, maybe 2 other co-founders, MJ Benias and Micah Hanks, who maybe anybody who's familiar with the UAP topic are probably familiar with those names. Those guys have been around the topic a lot longer than I have. But we launched it last year. You know, I wish I could give you like this defined, really good structure of what we wanted. But rather, all of us were writing for different outlets, some of the ones that you mentioned, Popular Mechanics, Vice. And like anybody who starts a lot of businesses, we were interested in a certain direction of things. We saw, we were fascinated in breakthrough technology, breakthrough science, and even stuff that I think a lot of people regulate to the fringe. But the very credible individuals who are examining it, whether it's in the scientific arena or the UAP topic in particular, was something that I think we'd all agree was a huge impetus behind it, because for us, we were trying to report on the topic in a serious manner, the same way you would any subject, in which I think you can be done. It's shown that it can be done. But when you're working for somebody else, you have to, you're not your own boss, you're not your own editor. And we said, yeah, I think people want to see this type of information in a different way. And so that's what we, for better or worse, launched it. And for better, I would say. We've done really well this year. I've been very blessed to get a lot of great readership, continue growing, great people that have come in and helped in the endeavor, like our own Chrissy Newton. She's become part of the Debrief family with us as well. And so we're going to continue to grow this. And I think every day bring new science, incredible information, and maybe highlight some areas where the next big disruptive technology in science is going to come from. And it's always our focus when we talk about disruptive.
Yeah, that's great. The thing that I really like about it is that it is forward looking, and it's right up our alley. And that's where I think something like the Debrief and some of the other outlets out there are attempting to do. It's totally different than the mainstream media. And that is something that I personally, and I know that the rest of the panel will, and our correspondents will agree, that's totally different from what the mainstream media is doing. Although they're nipping in the edges about the whole UAP issue and other kinds of, scientific technologies. Areas like the Debrief and the War Zone and Vice News, they're going beyond that. And that's something that, from an educational point of view, I think it's so important to keep people informed. And with people getting their information more and more online, I think you're positioned really, really well. So with that, what I'm going to do? I'm going to throw it to Chrissy. I know she's got a couple of questions, as do Giorgio and Francesco. So let's start with Chrissy. Chris, I know you got some questions for Tim. So why don't you start us off?
You're muted, Chrissy. Chrissy, you're muted.
Sorry, guys, I forgot. Thanks.
There you go.
So, Tim, we obviously worked together at the Debrief. So I came in, right? I came in a little bit later. I came in January. But we saw with the really big story in early November of last year about the Acorn UFO. So we've seen that narrative shift. And now over time, we've noticed that the Debrief has been influencing mainstream media as well as helping it, I would say. How do you feel that the Debrief has changed this narrative, or what has the change been in the narrative since launching? Because you guys launched with a really big bang.
I think that's been one of, for me personally, I think that's been one of the achievements I've been proudest of. So not just the readership we've gotten a lot of great content, and we have a lot of great writers and a lot of great people that work with us. But I think at times when I've seen, major mainstream media outlets, major broadcast news shows that reach out to us and are like, hey, we suddenly we want to get in on this UAP thing, and can you kind of get us up to speed? What are we looking at here? And that tells me I think we've been successful thus far in what we set out in covering that topic in particular. For one thing, we realized it's very difficult to cover that day in and day out. There's just not enough information, and it takes a lot of digging. And if you're going to try to do that, oftentimes that's how, at least from an investigator's background, that's how you make mistakes. And so we said, no, we want to do thorough, good, credible information. And most importantly, we want to do it the same way, with the serious tone that I think it deserves. I think no matter what your pre-existing beliefs are or opinions about it, especially with what we've seen the last couple of years, when you have senior political leadership, senior people at the Pentagon talking about it, well, it deserves serious attention. Either those people are crazy, that's important, we need to know that, or there's something interesting going on. And so we said, it can be done in that manner without the silly, green alien jokes because I think it's serious. And so I think that's one of the things that I have been the proudest of, is to look and see that I think in a lot of ways we were able to set that precedent and show other media outlets, hey, you can do this. Like you can host a 60-minute show and be totally serious about this and not make jokes and, put on your tinfoil hat. And so that's one of the things that I think when we look back as we close out a year, I will say we have been successful, and that was one of our initial goals, really, in launching this thing, that I think we've been successful in.
That's great. And it's interesting to see where you came from and how this developed, as Chrissy was indicating and Victor was also indicating, that this is a very different approach. It's not the mainstream media. It is coming at it all from a very different angle. But in looking at the future, you also somewhat have to understand the past. And just as a point of interest here, for your own personal interests in this, what's the drive behind that? Where did that come from? Was it things that you encountered on the job, as Victor indicated, with your background in police and security and intelligence, or personal interactions that might have occurred with you in the past that is the driving force or interest for you in this?
I think the initial real interest started about 10 years ago. And it came, like a lot of people, actually, a lot of people, this is part of our debrief team, with my own personal sighting of something. I always caveat that is, say, I don't know what it was. It wasn't a nearly as dramatic sighting as some others that we've heard about, even popularly, or a lot of other people have had. But I saw something, and 5 bright lights in the sky. Have grown up in a big military family. Spent considerable time. This was in the Savannah area where there's a lot of military bases, but very, very familiar with the different flight lanes and military technologies. And that wasn't anything that I'm familiar with, but at the same time, I didn't see the silver disc. I didn't see it dart off at any kind of rapid speeds, but it was enough that, categorically it was unidentified. And so that fascinated me. I think that really sparked my initial interest. And especially realizing that at the time of my sighting, there was another, at the time I was a police sergeant, there was another police sergeant with me. So you've got somebody else there that's like, no, you're not crazy. Like, that's really happened. And wondering what, I think the whole reason I got into law enforcement is because I just have this drive for solving mysteries, any mysteries. And so here presented itself this new mystery. And, that drives me crazy when you've got a mystery that you can't solve or you want to solve. So I think that was my initial interest into it. Like a lot of other people, I'm somewhat of a newbie in the sense that it's dipping into what colloquially the UFO community didn't occur until after 2017. In the New York Times article, and you had people like Luis Elizondo come out, Christopher Mellon talking about it. So once that came out, and it wasn't long after that I ended up retiring from law enforcement and found myself needing some new mysteries to solve. I said, this is at the time I didn't see a lot of media interest in it, at least the scrutiny that I felt it deserved. Nobody was doing true investigative journalism. Nobody was beating the pavement. Nobody was knocking on doors and hounding people to find out. And so I said, hey, you know what? I'm not by no means a classically trained journalist, but I could do this. How much harder is this than what I was doing back in law enforcement? And so it's kind of a confluence of several things, but both having my own personal experience that spurned it, in addition to the fact of feeling like there was a huge hole here that was missing in providing good, interesting and thorough kind of investigative work, at least on the side of what the military and defense sector is doing. And that's what I always caution people, like, that's kind of my bag. That's where I stay in my lane to an extent, because that's where I'm comfortable with. That's where a lot of my background is, and I'm familiar in that arena. So not an easy task, but it is a fun one, I guess. Maybe fun, frustrating at times.
Yeah.
It definitely is. And it is, I think, something that Francisco has a few questions for you that you touched upon with your connections here to intelligence and law enforcement and the interests that you are having, and even to a certain degree collaboratively with other individuals that are out there. So Francisco, you're muted now.
Yeah,
there you go.
Thank you, Chris. I have a few questions as well. One of them was already answered by you when you talked about what led you to create the debrief. Can you tell us a little bit more about what is the mission and the vision of this project, the debrief? And did you in any way anticipate the debrief becoming a reference in such a short period of time? Did you anticipate that 1 year after, less than 1 year after the launch, you would be viewed as a reference in the UFO subject?
Gosh, I know that the right answer here is to say no. But Chrissy will probably be the first one to tell you that, and all the other guys with the team, is that I have a bit of a conqueror's mentality, in the sense that that's what I want. That's I push everybody, like, we can be successful. I think that that's they'll tell you, I push everybody not to rest on our laurels. And so, did I expect it? For all of my debrief team members that are listening, if I said no, they go, wait a minute. You told us we're going to do this. You told us. So, but I was definitely hopefully confident and optimistic, mainly because not me, but I knew that I had a great group of people with me. I knew that I had a really just stellar ensemble, and I've worked with teams and throughout my entire professional career, but I look at the people I work with now and I'm like, wow, it brings such a great diverse set to it. It's very much like family, down to the point where we'll bicker like siblings at times, but it's okay. Like, we're all hug, and it's like, it's like listening to my own kids when they fight, and I hate you, and then they're playing 5 minutes later. And so that's really what guides that drive and vision that you talk about. Is it's not a one singular, this is definitely not the Tim McMillan show, and it's not any one person show. And I think that's what makes it important, because it keeps us grounded. And we have these weekly meetings, and everybody has input that is very democratic in that sense. But what we all share, we all share one characteristic, and Christy again can chime into this. And I always say that if you want to have a good working team, always select people that you would be willing to go on a Goonies adventure with. If you've ever seen the movie The Goonies, you go people you trust that aren't going to steal When I Willie's treasure, but when good times and bad, somebody that you're going to have fun with. And so we have that, and we try to convey that in the content that we carry. And so our real mission and goal is it's not an easy one, but it's to take complex topics such as quantum mechanics. We talk about anti-gravity, novel propulsion, UAP, and present that to the average person, because these are things that are, have the potential to dramatically change life in a way that we've seen from the automobile from the horse and buggy to the automobile, to even what we've seen in the last 25 years. The fact that we're all sitting here, most of us on different continents across the world in different time zones, and we're all chatting right now, and then we're able to share that with people all across the world. That's not something that you would have thought is possible. But you look at how that technology, if we didn't have that technology, you think about what's going on with the pandemic today, where would we be? How many people would actually be out of jobs because they couldn't have this type of virtual workplace. And so these are the technologies that, as they're kind of slowly going, we take for granted because they've become normal. But they do dramatically change it. And in some cases, we see that with social media and other things, they can have negative effects. And so it's all kind of, let's look forward and see what's going to be out there, because in a way it'll prepare us. Because I think we all find that kind of stuff fun and exciting. The idea that, I would say maybe a part of me, to go back to the earlier question of what interests me about UAP, is the idea that this is, interstellar space visitors, for a selfish reason that if they can do it, so can I. Like, I want to be able to do it. I want human beings to be able to do it because I want to travel to space in my lifetime. And so, but that's just a scary proposition. But I think it's as much providing that information and equal parts inspiring it. I think that there's a lot of brilliant people in this world that either don't get their ideas out there because they're viewed as kooky, or maybe it's just that kid who's still in school right now who's going to be the one that cures cancer, or he's going to be the one, or he or she is going to be the one that is going to create our interstellar space vehicle. And it's providing that venue to say, hey, it's not just okay, but that's how human beings evolve, is imagining the future and creating. And so information and some imagination and inspiration, if I can sum up the whole debrief in 3 words.
Yeah. Chrissy, I know you want to respond to that. Before I go to Giorgio, I know you definitely want to say something about the whole team idea, because you and I have talked about this before. Many of the people who are involved in the whole UAP issue are sort of lone wolves, and it's so refreshing. It's so great to see, feel, and hear a team effort. What are your thoughts on the way that team was put together? And then we'll go to Giorgio.
Yeah, on the debrief side of things, I would say obviously our team is put together in multiple ways. That I echo everything Tim says. Every single essence of that I do. My question more to Tim, and I think that this is part of it, and we have investigative reporters in our team. I'm not on my end, but MJ, Benias, Micah Hanks, and yourself, Tim, you are different than the two of them because you have an investigative background. And I find that amazing. How does your investigative background play in the way that you do your journalism? Because it is a very different technique. And what is that technique that you use compared to, and am I telling maybe your trade secret, but
No.
What is the technique that you use that's different than other journalists within our group and then other journalists in general?
Sure. No, and it's a good question. It's a question that I've pondered on myself, because you wonder, like I mentioned, I'm not a classically trained journalist in that sense. I think one of the biggest things is because my investigative background, 18 years, 19 years of my life was spent investigating criminal events or events and preparing them for either grand juries, cases that were going to go to trials. I was not judge and jury. My job was to just try to get the bare facts and present it for others to make a determination of something beyond a reasonable doubt, or with absolute certainty, or if there were intelligence assessments to try to get that. Is it a high degree of credibility? Is it moderate? Absent was the idea of how exciting is the story. It was, what's the truth? What is the truth? What is the facts as we know it? Even to the point where, hey, these are all the facts that we have. This is as much truth as we can get right now. There's not, and that happens a lot, especially when I work criminal intelligence, is you're trying to predict things and make interpretations. You don't have a lot of evidence. And so it's like, here's what I think, but you always hedge that. And so I'd say the biggest difference is that when I'm going into a story, I'm looking at it, I still view it that way, but I'm going to eventually present this information. And this time the judge and jury is going to be the people. The court, I'm taking it to the court of public opinion, and here's the facts, here's everything that you want to look at. I'm not so concerned about how exciting is the story going to be. And so, could that at times result in a not exciting story? Maybe, but I hope it provides a accurate view of it. I think that's one of the biggest differences, at least in my approach, that comes in there, because at no point am I thinking, well, I don't want to interview this person because they're probably not going to say something that is already fitting the narrative that I'm trying to build. And unlike I think a lot of my friends who are very good journalists, I enjoy them, I like them. I don't have a narrative started and start trying. Oftentimes, when you're writing an article or you're working on something, you already have like, okay, your outline. Like you already know where you want to end up, and so you're like, I need to call this person and this person to make sure that I get it to where that ending that I want is. That doesn't start for me until everything's done. It ends up being a slower process that sometimes people get upset about because when are you coming out with something new? I think the November article that you mentioned, that was over a year worth of stuff. And so I think that's probably the biggest difference is in how I view things, how I go about it. But I can only that's what I know. So that's why we have people like MJ, who's our editor-in-chief, who has more of a classical media background. So he can, if nothing more, he can write a jazzy headline, maybe. Give me a little more media.
Giorgio, I know you've got a question for Tim. Why don't you take over?
Thank you. Yes, Tim, I saw your 2016 TEDx talk, We Can Build Bridges. There you presented how it's more adequate to build bridges with people, understanding where they are at psychologically, using some flexibility rather than attaching to a rigid protocol, right? Does this philosophy apply to the way the debrief is presented? And who would be the teenager in the case of the debrief?
Sure.
You know what I mean?
No, I understand. That's a good question, and I think that that particular speech that I gave was definitely a very real event. It was a very emotional event for me. I think hopefully people can see in that speech, and it was an event that I think it applies in not just what we do at the debrief, but probably anything in general in life. And the core message behind that is every one of us has our own pre-existing beliefs and opinions, but that because we all have that, that means everybody in this group right now has that. And they're not all going to be the same, but they're all formed for some reason. And it's imperative to understand each other and understand. So maybe Chrissy has a belief or a very firm felt feeling. There's a reason behind that. And though I don't understand it, there's a reason behind that, and the only way that you kind of understand it is when you stop for a minute, trying to defend your own position and get to know people. I mean, that's what the real core of that is. How that applies in terms of what we do at the debrief, or whether you're approaching the UAP subject, is, let's take UAP for an example. I'll be the first to say that when I first started looking into it, even though I had seen my own sighting, I thought, probably the first year that I looked into it, and even people who read some of my early stuff from maybe the war zone, I was like, all right, we're going to solve this. This is going to be nonsense. This is going to be some big, money-making scheme, something like that. But you have to, it goes back to what Christy said earlier, you can't follow that preconceived narrative. I could keep going down that same path and forcing it in there, and frankly, make myself look silly. But you have to go where the evidence goes. And once you reach that dead end, you have to stop with your own kind of, whether implicit or explicit biases, and go, wait a darn minute. I was not able to solve it. Now I need to listen to what other people have to say. And, that definitely, not just with UAP, when it comes to the debrief, and it's certainly by no means myself, Chris Plain, who's with us, does a great job. He's really in tune with the aerospace community, and really frankly, the next, he'll have some great stuff coming out of what is the next propulsion stuff we can look at. What are people doing? But, how did he gain those relationships as he talked to them? Where, I think a lot of other media outlets, a lot of other, maybe even scientists, if you said, hey, I think I can make anti-gravity, they're going to go, all right, it's got this nut over here, see you later. And so being willing to listen to what they have to say. I mean, that's, it would be great if we had some of those fun messages recorded when, the first time that somebody said they were going to build an automobile, the first time the electricity, and somebody was like, yeah, okay, sure thing, bud. Yeah. But it happens. And so, eventually it does happen. So that applies in not just what we do at the debrief, I'd say in general. And it definitely open. If nothing more, it's an open mind to see people, not just from your own view, but try to see everybody.
So I guess that you're preparing the mainstream and thoughtful people in general to open up to these possibilities.
Sure. Yeah. And those, I mean, there's a lot of parallels there, because during that time, shortly after that TED Talks, I was still in law enforcement. A lot of what I was doing was speaking to other law enforcement groups, other law enforcement agencies about race issues and policing, and frankly, just community policing, kind of saying, hey guys, like, we're public servants, meaning we serve the public. And if the public is all getting mad and they don't respect us, and there's a problem there, and we need to identify what that problem is, and telling people what their problem is. That's not, that's not going to solve it. And so it's very much, taking that approach. And I think bringing that, let's say the UAP topic again, when you're bringing that, you realize you're talking to a mainstream audience that is not as well versed with it. And so you have to be somewhat tempered. I think sometimes people get upset because they, why haven't you covered maybe some of the experiencer stuff and things like that? And, we explain, I definitely don't dismiss that stuff, but we're kind of, I'm just at the point now where I'm getting, former COD leadership or political leadership or high-level scientists who are very interested in this idea that these objects are flying around. We gotta take some baby steps here before we can talk about that, while respecting the person who feels that passionately about that, does so for a reason, and it may be because they've had a personal experience.
Can I ask you a more police-related question? Because I remember a case in Miami-Dade County, 1979. There was an abduction, Mr. Filiberto Cárdenas. And the police department wrote in the incident report, close encounter of the third kind. That's what it wrote. I have the number, the document, everything I could show you. But do you think that policemen have this freedom and is the freedom increasing to report about abductions, close encounters of the third kind? Is that changing? Is that improving? Is that possible?
I haven't seen that. Well, first of all, great question, and great thing to bring up, because I will tell you from firsthand experience, I mean, it's 100% truth that there were occasions, I can think of at least two off the top of my head, where people called to report a UFO sighting. They called 911. Often people call 911. They call the police for anything. They'd call us because the cable went out. And so when you don't know what to do, you call the police, and they're supposed to make everything better. And so you would call, and we responded where people had said they had these UFO sightings. The problem on our end is there's no reporting structure. There's no reporting mechanism. I'm not going to bore everybody with this whole system of how police reporting is done, but everything is very structured and rigid in different formats. There is no format for this. And so how that information often is just not recorded, because there's no, in fact, I'm impressed that particular incident you're talking about there was documented. And oftentimes if anything is documented, it falls into these kind of miscellaneous catch-all categories that get lost in the shuffle. These are potential data points that we now know with entities like the UAP Task Force, Department of Defense. This is information that they may find useful. However, right now, to my knowledge. And I'm still a member of the Law Enforcement Action Partnership, which is an international organization that lobbies different things with the Chiefs of Police Association. I actually brought this up a couple of years ago and said that this is, there is not, I know there's a lot of focus on the military, but at least in the United States, there is not a larger force of trained observers who are constantly out and about 24/7, 365 days a year than the law enforcement. And so there should be some encouragement in documenting this type of thing, especially given how many camera systems law enforcement agencies carry with them now, whether it's body cameras, car cameras. There's just immense potential. And my argument for the people who are dismissive and say this is, it's not aliens, it's drones or whatever. Well, okay. But I think that, again, national security, public safety is our job. And so if there are drones flying around, we should probably care about that. So it's a long way of saying that those systems are even less in place or less structured than even the military, which aren't great. But there is huge potential there.
Yes, and I'm glad that we brought this issue. The case number was 2954-7, and it's a precedent that maybe you, your friends, the police departments should build upon now that the UAP situation is becoming more legitimate.
Yeah, and every now and then I'll get a few, because a lot of people don't realize that the same freedom of information laws that people use against the federal government, oftentimes they apply to the local governments, and frankly, they're much easier. And so, there's I still have some good connections with different law enforcement agencies back in Georgia. And every now and then I'll get some, they'll just send me one. Say, hey, by the way, here you go.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of cases out there. And with it being in the news and investigations happening, you do have to wonder where it's leading and where it's going. And Tim, you've mentioned here that, especially with your background in law enforcement and investigations, you go where the evidence leads you. And in your very broad approach that you're taking here with the debrief, where you're looking at science and tech and aerospace, defense, UAP, where do you see the information leading you? And especially in the context, again, of what we're doing, and Victor spoke about at the beginning of this broadcast, that we're not so much about talking about the lights in the skies and things that we've all seen and know about and have heard about countless times, but based on that evidence, what does the future look like? Where do you think that this is leading us? And in particular, do you have some little surprises perhaps coming our way where you are looking into events, bits and pieces of information, evidence that have come your way? So again, where do you see this leading us?
Sure. Well, at the latter part of that, I've always got these just running, I call them cold case files, although they're more recent information, but there's just not enough. And so as stuff comes up, I keep sticking stuff in it. And so, hopefully, it's one of these things where I'm just missing one little piece, because it's important to, again, you want to bring credible information. You want people to look at it and it be backed by credible individuals and either documentary or physical evidence, so that it makes a real impact. And so there's one or two pieces that could come tomorrow, it could come the next 2 years. So that's the tough part about kind of holding some of that, but not asking people to speculate based on what we bring forward. In terms of what the future holds, that's a tough one. Specific to the UAP topic, that's a tough one right now. And I think we've talked about that internally for us. And I've said this after, when the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released their report in June, I think a lot of people were probably disappointed there wasn't more information. Frankly, coming from a bit of an intelligence background, I was impressed by the report and what it did share. But for me, once that came out, there was at least the finality of, okay, we can end the debate of whether this is occurring, at least in the military context. Is this some big hoax? I don't think there was much debate before that. But once you go on congressional record, you and knowing how these types of documents are prepared, and in the background behind it, you realize how many hands go into this. And so like this, it's a lot more significant than I think people realize. And so once that was there, and you realize that down from the president of the United States to the director of national intelligence to all these bigwigs had to kind of sign off on this before it came out. All right, so now we can move past this idea. Is there objects of unknown origin that appear to be in skies that at least our military personnel are encountering? So that's answered, in my opinion. Like, okay, there. So the next question is, what is it? That's the big one. Now, that's the tough one to say what the future holds. And the reason I say that for a couple of reasons, because this is not a new topic. People have been asking that very question for decades, 70 years more, depending on how long. That's the thing. I've talked to researchers who've been doing this for decades, and I'm like, wow, I'm very impressed. And they're kind of at that same spot that I feel at, and a lot of people feel at, is you're like, all right, it's real. What is it? That's the hard part, because whatever it isn't telling us the best, or it's not telling me. I know some people believe that they've had different encounters and know more, and I'm like, that's great. Could you just tell them to please maybe do a YouTube live stream, come on the news, land during the Super Bowl? Like, let's just end all this, and everybody knows. But barring them doing that, it's they're not really pushing the envelope. And then I look at it from, especially because there's so much focus, and again, my focus is on the defense sector. And now I realize in terms of the ability or the likelihood of further releases of information is so tough, because let's kick out the idea of what UFOs are and all of this, but I look at it from just the pure aspect that if you've got objects of unknown origin that's in your airspace, that represents vulnerabilities to your national security. That represents vulnerabilities to your capabilities, and any vulnerabilities to national defense, no matter what military, no matter what government you are in the world, these are things that you do not discuss under any circumstances. It's the equivalent of letting people know that you hide the key to your house in the rock by the back door, while knowing that there are at least some of your neighbors really want to break in bad. And so realizing that, I know that these are areas that are highly classified. Adding to that, it's very likely that a lot of the capabilities that are recording these things are very classified. It's not the weapons that are the most classified things in the government. It is your capabilities for intelligence, reconnaissance, and surveillance. And so when you've got these highly classified systems that you don't want to acknowledge because they're actually designed to spy on China, Russia, whoever that are capturing these things, it's just this confluence of a whole bunch of everybody be quiet. Let's lock this door down super tight. And especially after we saw a lot of the kind of leaks that came out from some of the official information, but not classified. And so I sit here and wonder, where are we going to go? This idea that the government's going to quote unquote disclose anything, I think certainly not willingly. I mean, that may be a depressing thought, but just based on what I know about the kind of defense sector. And so it'll take some congressional pressure. It'll take some public pressure. The caveat to all of that is that there's a whole lot more going on that I'm unaware of, and that's always on the table. And so if there's a whole lot more that I'm unaware of, that it's not representing a true unknown to the government, and that they do recognize it as not being a vulnerability to their capabilities, that they don't view it as a threat that could be exploited, and they want to tell people. That would be cool. I want that. It's not something I've often seen in government, but I would love that.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of that for sure. Francesco, I know you've got another question for Tim.
I have a quick question. Yes, thank you, Victor. Over last year, there were a couple of articles from the debrief that led me to the impression that maybe you or the debrief in its project had access to the same or similar sources in the field of intelligence, and you almost like a competition between you and the TSA, Luis Elizondo. Was it just an impression? Was there something behind it?
Well, definitely wasn't a competition between us and TTSA or Luis Elizondo. I would say that I was very fortunate, and I still am very fortunate, not for any other special reason than just like I mentioned, knocking on doors, asking people, and trying to establish good relationships with people and earn trust of people that I wasn't going to cross any lines, because anybody who's working in government isn't supposed to talk to journalists, and moreover, the reason that they're so concerned about that is all of these top secret things that don't have anything to do with UFOs. Is this guy a quote journalist who's working for Russia and China trying to figure out secrets? But letting them know I don't want to know anything classified. So that's not my goal here, but rather, if this is a serious issue, then the way that democratic societies are supposed to work is the people need to be aware of that to at least an extent that they recognize that this is a real issue. After that, you can have some of the secrecy. I always tell people, if Congress passes a bill saying that they want to stop Russian hacking, people don't go, maybe that's a bad example. Some people don't believe that there's Russian hacking, but for the most part, people don't, they've been provided enough information that this is a real thing. And so if this is a real thing, I'm like, you got to kind of give and take. And so I was very fortunate to have been able to kind of work my way up to having relationships or talking to people who work at different capacities in government. Obviously, I have to be kind of cautious about saying much more than that, not for any other reason than, we're kind of bound to protect your sources and everything. But, that in itself brings up new headaches, because you have to vet those sources. Just because somebody's in a position doesn't mean that they're telling you the truth. You've got to make sure that they're not just stringing you along, that type of thing. But yeah, it was, I've been fortunate, at least, I would say, and aided by the fact, if nothing else, that having a law enforcement and a little bit of an intel background, I speak the same language. And Luis Elizondo, tell you, we've talked plenty of times. We speak the same language when we're off the mic, when we're just chatting, because we kind of have similar backgrounds. And so that in itself, I would say that having that background aided me considerably.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because behind the scenes, so much is going on right now. It's like herding kittens. You don't know where they're going, what they're doing, whether out of your sight. You have to kind of either get your act together and cast a broader net and bring it all together to make it meaningful to your audience. Just in the last few minutes that we have, Tim, could I just get your overall perspective on the geopolitical and international direction things are going globally, without necessarily any kind of reference to U.S. military influence? Or how do you see this thing globally panning out in terms of the flow of information, and how people generally will understand what's going on, and how do we frame it for them?
That's a great question, and it's a fantastic question especially when you talk about it in a broader sense of the geopolitical world, because every different culture, every different nation has their own idiosyncrasies and their own views, and it's very interesting. I think that especially living in Europe, and a lot of my work in the last year has been in Eastern Europe and like in Russia, and seeing what other world powers are doing. And it's very interesting because everybody has their own view. It's either, oh yeah, that's got to be Russian tech, or oh yeah, that's got to be US tech. Like everybody, if anybody's ever seen that meme cartoon of Spider-Man where he's pointing at all the other Spider-Mans, it's you, it's you. It's one of these things that I feel like I wish that we could get a lot of the world powers in the same room, to be honest. And I feel like everybody would be pointing each other going, it's you, right? And then we can get past this. Wait, it's not really you? Oh man. Because I think that's the difficult part, is you have all these conflicting interests. You have the, is it really another country? But wait, if it's not another country, if we are talking about extraterrestrial technology, suddenly it becomes, well, I want it before they do. And you know, is there this race for it? And you're like, come on. I think that some of the best interviews that I have had with people have been astronauts, because I've always asked them, you know, it's very interesting, especially look at it now, NASA astronauts, especially at times when there's a lot of defense or political friction between countries like Russia and the United States, but you have US and Russian cosmonauts and US astronauts going up to the space station together, flying on each other's aircraft. And I would say, what is that like? You know, why, how you get along well? I mean, usually the average person gets along. Countries dispute, but if you get, you know, no matter what the conflicts are, the citizens are usually like, hey, you're like me. And they said, you know, the interesting things I always hear is the reason is that explorer mentality. Once you realize that you're dealing with a whole new frontier, you're going to a whole new place. All those other things like national disputes and national interest kind of shed away. And it's suddenly you feel this common bond. And so maybe that's kind of an altruistic, maybe naive feeling, but in a way, I wish that this topic could generate that. If it was for no other reason, then again, like I said, if we could get Russia, China, and the United States, or all these countries come together and go, hey, I think that something else is coming here from another solar system. Now, I hadn't figured out who it is or why, but if they can do it, we can too. Like, forget an international space station. Let's build something cool. And I think if you were able to pull it, humanity does great things when it comes together. And so I think that, but how can we get to that point? I don't know. I mean, that's a tough question.
Yeah. I think
it's really a great point.
Yeah, for sure. I think the psychology behind what Tim is saying is so important to have that sort of mentality to bring together people, to build consensus rather than, you know, developing your own personal agenda or your own kind of national agenda. So that psychology is important. So I'll throw it back to you, Chris, to any other point you want to make, or before we wrap up?
Sure. Just one quick question here before we wrap up. I want to toss it over to Giorgio. Had one more for you. And then as we're nearing the hour on our podcast here, it'll be time to wrap up. So one more for you from Giorgio.
Thank you, Chris. I have a question because sometimes in the movies one sees the police deferring to the feds. Let's say the Acorn lands again somewhere in some city and the police cordons off the site and starts investigating. All of a sudden the federals come, you know, the feds come and they say, get out. This is our jurisdiction now. Is that true? Would that be true? Would the police have to defer immediately to the feds?
No. No, it often defaults, to the local authorities, are the ones that are in charge. Now, oftentimes, that's a fun question because oftentimes what you see in the movie is a little bit of a wrong impression, because you get this idea where the feds and the locals combat over who's going to take this. This is our case, not yours. It's the exact opposite. Usually it is, oh, this is your case, I don't want it. Because it's a lot, you're rolling the body because it's right on the edge of the city limits, and you're like, it's theirs, not ours. And so, if you were to talk about something like that, and I have worked major serious mass casualty instance. We had a large aircraft crash, military aircraft crash in the city I was working. We had major explosion at a refinery. So I've worked these major events. And oftentimes what it boils down to is who's got the best resources for the job. And typically that's going to be the federal government. You know, in the case of the plane crash, they have the, you know, we don't deal with that enough to have those specialized units. But ultimately, usually wherever that would happen, it's the jurisdiction where that occurs, who has the authority, unless for whatever reason, something, you know, the federal government can step in and overstep and take over everything. But usually that doesn't happen. It's usually in kind of a working collaborative.
That's great to know and great to understand.
Yeah.
That we do, as you indicated, I think there's a little bit of a dramatization, over dramatization that occurs as is necessary for what we see in film and movies and so forth. And it is a case of there's much more cooperation that goes on. And as you said, the real key is who has the resources locally to be able to come in and do it. Not that there couldn't be another Acorn Landing, Kecksburg type incident that would occur, that there would most likely, though, be a cooperation that would happen with the different types of law enforcement on the site.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's the best way of looking at it.
Yeah, you wouldn't just be able to kick them out, you know, or the feds just come in and kick the cops out or keep you quiet. It'd be hard.
It would be difficult
to know.
Very difficult to know. They would work together.
May happen again. Thank you.
I'm sure it will. And with that, we draw to a close on our most current podcast here. I want to thank Tim McMillan for being with us. You've been a wonderful guest, very informative. Thank the panel and correspondents for the insightful questions that they gave and the answers that you were able to give to them. Once more, I want to point out to everybody Tim's website that's been in place here for a little over a year, called the Debrief.org, not .com, .org. So the Debrief.org, wonderful information on there with science, tech, space, defense, aerospace, the future. And we would like everybody here that is watching this to go check it out. And at the same time, if you like this video, if you like this interview, please punch that like button. Talk to your friends, neighbors, relatives, parents, people you like, people you don't like. Have them come by, check us out, subscribe. We want to get our word out. We want to keep our view on the future. We want to be able to keep bringing in people like Tim McMillan, who is going to provide to us and with us and for us a view of what that edge of reality, what that edge looks like here as we move forward. What does this all mean for us? Until next time, thank you, everybody, and we'll see you back soon.
You've been listening to the New Frontier Network.